The White Lady by Marion Carruthers. The story which I am about to relate has reference to a subject which often discussed and little understood: the connection which exists between this shifting scene and the world of spirits. It is of little import to the reader whether I am a skeptic or a convert to the theory. It may be more material for him to be assured that he is troubled with the details on my own personal authority. You know the Mannerings of Cheshire, and remember their seat, Ashley Park. It was when I had just left school that I accompanied my most intimate friend, Miss Mannering, on a visit to her mother at Ashley. Mrs. Mannering was a widow, blessed with an ample fortune and great animal spirits, who laughed and ate and talked and played the kind hostess and delighted in seeing everyone happy about her, who thanked heaven that she had not a nerve in her body, and hoped that she should die as she had lived, comfortably. The house was crowded with company, and Mrs. Mannering made an apology for being obliged to assign to me as my bedchamber the cedar room. It was a large, fine old apartment, wainscoted with cedar, and from there being a door at each end of it which led to different parts of the house, had on high days and holidays been used as an antechamber. There were no old pictures, no Gothic furniture, no tapestry to predispose the imagination to superstitious feelings, or to foster in the mind melancholy forebodings. The window was sashed, the fireplace good, but neither Gothic nor over-large, and the room itself, though of unusual dimensions, had the appearance of antiquity, unaccompanied by anything somber. We had been dancing, and I went to bed in high spirits. It was between 2 and 3 in the morning when I awoke with a start and saw distinctly a female figure passing through my room. I inquired without fear who was there. There was no answer. The figure proceeded slowly onwards and disappeared at the door. It struck me as being singular, but knowing the house to be filled with company, and that the greater part were strangers to the endless labyrinth of staircase and anteroom which overrun the mansion, I concluded some heedless guest had mistaken my chamber, or that one of the servants, forgetting the circumstance of it being inhabited, had literally put it to its old use, a passage-room. At all events, thought I, it will be cleared up at breakfast, and without feeling any alarm or attaching any importance to the incident, I struck the hour by my repeater watch and fell asleep. The next morning I was somewhat startled by finding both the doors locked on the inside, and by recollecting with what care I had turned the key the preceding evening. The breakfast bell, however, disturbed the reign of my ruminations. I hurried hastily downstairs and thought no more on the subject. In the course of conversation, my kind hostess inquired how I had slept. "Very soundly," said I, "except that I was rather surprised by someone who, no doubt by mistake, passed through my room at 2 this morning." Mrs. Mannering looked earnestly at me, seemed on the point of asking me a question, checked herself, and turned away. The next night I went to bed earlier, and at nearly the same hour the figure appeared. But there was no doubt now upon my mind. On this occasion I saw the face, its pale countenance, its large, melancholy black eyes, its steep noiseless, as it glided over the oaken floor, gave me a sensation that I can never forget. Terrified as I was, I fixed my eyes on it. It stood before me, then slowly receded. When it reached the middle of the room, stopped. And while I looked at it, was not. I own it affected me strangely. Sleep for the remainder of the night was impossible, and though I endeavored to fortify my mind by recollecting all I had heard and read against the theory, to persuade myself that it was illusion, and that I should see no more of it, I half determined to conclude my visit at once, or, at all events, to change my room immediately. Morning came, bright, sunny morning, and the race ball of the morrow, and a dread of the ridicule which would follow my determination overpowered my resolution. I was silent, and I stayed. The third night came. I confess, as the evening drew in, I shuddered at the idea of going to bed. I made excuses. I talked over the events of the night. I played. I sang. I frittered away minute after minute, and so well did my stratagem succeed that, too, the dreaded hour was past long ere I entered my chamber. After a determined and minute investigation of the room, after a thorough examination of every closet and corner, after barring and bolting each door with a beating heart, a woman's fears, shall I confess it, stole over me, and hastily flinging myself on the bed, I muffled up my face entirely in the clothes. After lying in this manner for 2 hours in a state of agony that baffles all description, I ventured to cast a hurried glance around the room. It must be, I thought, near daybreak. It was so, but by my side stood a figure, her form bent over me, her face so close to mine that I could have touched it, her white drapery leaning over me, so that my slightest motion would have discomposed it. I looked again to convince myself that it was no deception, and have no recollection of anything further. When I came to myself, it was nearly noon. The servants, and indeed Mrs. Mannering herself, had repeatedly knocked at the door, and, receiving no answer, were unwilling to disturb me. My kind hostess was alone in the breakfast room when I entered, and was preparing to rally me on my early hours, when, evidently struck by my appearance, she inquired if I was well. "Not particularly," said I, faintly, "and if you will allow me, I returned home this morning." She looked at me in silence for some moments, and then said with emphasis, "Have you any particular reason?" "Nay, I am sure you have," she continued, as her keen, penetrating eye detected an involuntary tremor. "I have no concealments," was my reply, and immediately detailed the whole transaction. She heard me gravely without interruption or expressing any surprise. At length she said, "I am grieved beyond measure, my dear young friend, for the event. I certainly have heard strange and unaccountable stories about the room, but I always treated them as idle tales, quite unworthy of credit. This is the first time for years it has been occupied, and I shall never cease to reproach myself for having tried the experiment. But, for heaven's sake," she added, "don't mention it. Assure me, promise me, you will not breathe a syllable on the subject to any living being. If amongst these ignorant and superstitious people this inexplicable occurrence should once get wind, not a servant would stay with me." I assented, and on all her offers of a different room, pressing entreaties to remain, and promises of fresh arrangements, I put a decided negative. Home I returned that morning. A long interval elapsed before I again visited Ashley. Miss Mannering, my kind and warm-hearted friend, had sunk into an early grave. and I had had in the interim to stem the torrent of affliction and buffet with its waves. At length, a most pressing and personal invitation brought me once more under Mrs. Mannering's roof. There I found her sister, who, with 3 young children, were laughing and revelling away their Christmas. Lady Pierrepoint was one of those fortunate women who, by dint of undaunted assurance and an unparalleled tongue, had contrived to have her own way through life. Her first exploit on coming to Ashley was to fix upon the cedar room for the children. In vain, poor Mrs. Mannering pointed out its faults. She was afraid they would find it cold. Her ladyship wished them to be hardy. It was out of the way, so much the better. The noise would not be troublesome. I fear, went on Mrs. Mannering. Don't know what fear is, said Lady Pierrepoint. In short, she continued with her imperturbable face, this room or none. And Mrs. Mannering, not daring to avow the real cause of her fears, yet feeling that further contest was useless, saw with feelings of horror the little cribs and rocking horses, nurses, and ninepins formally established in the dreaded apartment. Things went on very smoothly for a fortnight. No complaints of the cedar room transpired, and Mrs. Mannering was congratulating herself on the happy turn affairs had taken, when, one day, on her going into the nursery, she saw her little nephews busily engaged in packing of their playthings. What? Are you tired of Ashley and going to leave me? Oh, no, dear aunt, they shouted one and all. Oh, no, but we are going to hide away our toys from the White Lady. She came last night and Sunday night, and she'd such large black eye, and she'd stood close by our cribs, just here, aunt. Who is she? Do you know? For Fred says she never speaks. What does she do here, and what does she want? What a wretched, miserable woman I am, cried the panic-struck Mrs. Mannering. Every hope I had entertained of this abominable room is dashed to the ground forever, and if by any chance Lady Pierrepoint should discover— Oh, they must be moved directly. Ring the bell. Where's the housekeeper? I'll give no reason. I'll have no reason. Oh, my dear departed Mannering, to what sorrows have you not exposed your disconsolate widow? In spite of all inquiries, interrogatories, and surmises moved the little Pierrepoints were that very evening. Our precautions, however, were all but defeated, for one of the little magpies began after dinner. Mamma, I've got something to tell you about the White Lady. He was instantly crammed almost of suffocation with sweetmeats. The rest were very shortly trundled out of the room, choking with bonbons, and I shall never forget the piteous expression of Mrs. Mannering's countenance as she passed me with her party, or her declaration, Heaven have mercy on me, for I see very clearly this White Lady will put me in my grave. The room was then shut up for some years, and I can give no account of what passed at Ashley in the interim. The last time I was there was on the day on which young Mr. Mannering came of age. His mother had been receiving the loud and rustic, but not on that account the less sincere, congratulations of the tenants on the lawn, when she was told her more courtly visitors were awaiting her in the drawing-room. On this occasion the sins of the cedar room were forgotten, and it was once more used as an antechamber. To enter it, throw off her shawl and bonnet, and run to a large swing glass which stood near a window was the work of an instant. She was hastily adjusting her dress when she startled, for she saw, reflected at full length in the glass beside her, the figure of the White Lady. it was many days before the brain fever, which her fright and her fall brought on, would allow her to give any connected account of what till then appeared an inexplicable occurrence. Her reason and recollection gradually returned, but her health never. A few weeks afterwards, she quitted Ashley Park for the grave. Good night.